Thank you
Welcome.
all for turning up this evening to listen to me talk. I don't know how much, obviously, any of you know about me, so I'll talk a little bit about how I ended up um, being drawn into the world of glass. So I was born on the Isle of Wight, and I was born the same year that the famous Michael Harris set up the Isle of Wight Studio Glass. And my parents, throughout my life, and still to this day, spend most of their weekend, well, not unfortunately not at the moment, but most of their weekends traveling around craft fairs, visiting glass blowers, all those type of things. So when I was a kid, I think my parents must have taken me to watch Michael Harris blowing glass at the Isle of Wight. Um, so it must have been in my blood. And as I kind of grew up, when I got to sort of school age, I decided after a brief period of wanting to be a dentist, that I wanted to go to art school. And I decided I was living up in, I was born on the Isle of Wight and gradually moved up the country and ended up just outside Aberdeen in Scotland. And I knew I wanted to go to art school, and I knew I wanted to do glass blowing at art school. So I'd applied to Edinburgh School of Art, which was the nearest art school to me that had a glassblowing facility. Unfortunately, I didn't get into Edinburgh, but I got into my second choice, which was Aberdeen, which was the closer art school to me. And I was quite happy with that because, I was into sort of 3D work and I had a very good sculpture department. So I spent my time kind of sort of using the facilities they had, but still exploring my interest in glass. So my degree showed that the work that I produced was sort of three-dimensional glass sculpture. I used a lot of sort of sheet glass. I acid etched and kind of combined on various levels, and it was all kind of to do. I was into sort of optical effects, so I used a lot of mirrors, a lot of layering with glass, and that was kind of my thing. Then art school ended. I kind of did the whole sort of hang around on the dole for a while thing. And then I was fortunate enough to land a job working in a stained glass studio just outside Aberdeen, and quite a well-known. I'm not sure whether they're still in existence now, but when I joined them, she was taken on staff because she just landed the commission for the Piper Alpha memorial window. I don't know if any of you guys remember the Piper Alpha disaster, which was a big fire on one of the offshore oil rigs just off the coast of Aberdeen, where a lot of people died. And the lady I worked for just landed the commission to produce this window. So there was a lot of work going on in her studio at the time. And one of the first commissions I started working on with her was for Elgin Cathedral. And it was a very, very basic job, but it involved me having to cut probably around about 3,000 diamond shaped pieces of glass, sandblasting them and then firing them in the kiln to age the glass so it looked antique. So that was my first sort of job in stained glass, was just cutting. And I remember, I think probably the first 50 that I cut for her, she came along with her template and sat them on top of it and said, "Look, these won't do. You're going to have to do them again." So it sort of launched me into kind of cutting glass at that stage, and the accuracy of cutting glass, which is something that's sort of stuck with me to the work that I produce today. So a lot of the work I produce now still relies on those techniques I learned back in the stained glass studio and that level of accuracy required for that type of work, which I've still continued to use. So so I was working for probably about 3.5 years in her studio, learning the basics of stained glass, painting on glass, all the very kind of traditional techniques. But at the same time, I was experimenting a little bit with, because she had a kiln, so I was experimenting a little bit with just throwing bits of glass in the kiln. I knew nothing about kiln forming glass at all back then, and neither did she. So we would just gather scraps of stained glass and put them together and melt them in the kiln, and then one by one, these pieces of glass would just gradually break apart in her studio. We'd be down having a cup of coffee and we'd hear this crack come from the other side of the studio where another piece of glass had kind of broken apart from one of the creations that we'd put together. So we didn't really know what we were doing. So it was just experimenting. So anyway, after about 3.5 years, I left working for Jennifer Jane, this lovely little glass studio, and I worked as a freelance window designer. So I was drawing the cartoons for stained glass windows and doing some of the more finer work for another stained glass producer in Aberdeen. So I was doing the painting on the glass and firing the painting. I was doing some sandblasting and acid etching for details within the windows, but I wasn't installing or putting windows together. So stained glass was kind of my background, and I've always loved rose windows since I was young. Another thing that my folks used to take me to at the weekend was around churches, and we would always go and admire the stained glass windows. So it was always something that was a kind of passion of mine. But this kind of came to an end. I had some girl problems, and I fled Aberdeen and ended up down in Manchester, and which is where my parents were. So I'd kind of left my flat in Aberdeen and everything that was kind of there, and came down here. And my mum at that stage, she's a potter. She's a kind of craft potter. She makes little kind of birds and raku fires. So she had a kiln in her garage and all the kind of the stuff that went with that. So while I was down here, I was working driving a forklift truck. Didn't really have any kind of plan of what I was going to do art-wise. I didn't really see a great future in it for me. But I started on my weekends, because I didn't really know anyone down in Manchester at the time. I started dabbling. So I would use my mum's pottery kiln and just start throwing bits of glass in. And this was like 25 years ago now. So there wasn't, the whole kind of fusing glass community that exists today didn't really exist. So there wasn't like forums or really any books for me to kind of turn to actually learn how to do this. So I was very much experimenting, just trying first off with window glass, and then gradually, I would hear certain places were beginning to sell this glass that was specially designed for fusing in the kiln. So, it just kind of slowly grew, and I started making these things of a weekend. I had some massive disasters to begin with. But it was just nice to just learn the craft slowly without any pressure. But then I started making pieces, and it got to a stage that, I had quite a large stock of work. So I'd book craft fairs, and it was at the time when craft fairs were really a big thing. There would be like 3 or 4 marquees and people queued up in cars to arrive at these events. It's a lot different these days. And my first few craft fairs, I was finding I was doing extremely well. So, I had a product that no one else really had. There was no one else fusing glass in the same way I was at the time. So I was finding I was having really good sales, and this was on top of me working my job. And so it ended up that to try and keep up with the level of stock that I needed for the craft fairs, I just didn't have enough time in the week. So I ended up giving up my job and taking on this as a full-time thing. And so, it just happened, just a nice kind of gradual transition in from just being this guy driving forklift trucks who had no idea of where he was going to kind of take his degree in art that I had into having this full-time business, making glass craft and selling at craft fairs at the weekend. And that just kind of carried on. And for 14 years, the thing that really changed it and made me become more professional about the whole thing was I used to do the Christmas markets in Manchester, and this was a massive kind of undertaking for me, because they were pretty much they ran from sort of mid-November till pretty much Christmas Eve, and you were there every day for 12 hours a day. So you had to make sure you had enough stock to cover that entire period. You know, a lot of craft people would turn up and sell out of their work within a week. You had to make sure you had enough work to last that entire period. So I found that, you know, I was having to work the entire year just to stock these Christmas markets I was doing, um, for that period right at the end of the year. So it was hard work, and it kind of it hardened me up. You know, being out amongst the public. Generally, you know, most of them didn't quite understand what you did. Some of them were interested and wanted to know more because they didn't understand. Others were not quite so friendly in the way they would approach someone like me selling something they didn't quite understand. So it kind of hardened up my skin a little bit, but to the point where after 14 years I'd had enough, and I decided it was time to try and because whilst I was making all these products that were selling quite well on the Christmas markets, you know, I never made Christmas decorations. I was never that was never something that I wanted to do, was to actually make something that would hang on a Christmas tree, or I never wanted to make a Rudolph's head or anything like that. So I stuck to my kind of aesthetic, but still made something that was affordable and pretty, that would sell to people who generally didn't understand craft. And you know, it was a, you know, I owe it a lot. It was a great experience. You know, I had some fantastic customers who would save. You know, they'd come to me and they would say that I've saved for 2 years to buy one of your bowls. Um, so you know, people who generally wouldn't have bought, you know, wouldn't buy art, wouldn't go to craft fairs, but because it was the Christmas markets, they were exposed to that kind of thing. So it was a good experience, but it was an experience that after 14 years of doing it, it was time to move on. So that kind of coincided with me, you know, having belief and confidence in what you do is something that I've always sort of struggled with, and so I'd always been making these bowls that were kind of like in the background of all my other work. You know, I had my the work that I really wanted to make, but it had always taken a back seat to the stuff that I knew would sell. And so I finally decided that, you know, I had to make the break and concentrate more on the work that I wanted to make rather than the things that I knew would sell. So I gave up the Christmas markets, and to lose that suddenly was quite a worry for me, because it kept me going quite well for many years, and then to take away that whole sort of source of my income caused me quite a lot of anxiety. But I kind of had a vision of where I wanted to go. Excuse me. And and not having the anchor of the Christmas markets, and that kind of weight of production that I had to put forward every year to make them work. Having that gone from around my neck meant I could concentrate more on the work that I really wanted to make, and apply for exhibitions and such like. So I you know, so I'd never, as I say, I'd never had a great deal of confidence in what I was making. I never really had exposed it to the wider glass community. So I applied for the Glass Biennale, and with no real kind of vision of even getting in. So yeah, it was a great surprise when I had my acceptance letter that year. You know, I had some interest from, you know, Vessel Gallery down in London had been, you know, I'd been down to visit them and taken work down, and so I knew that there was a possible chance that what I was making did have some validity within the glass world. So yeah, I had no expectation of actually getting into the Biennale when I applied. and certainly not winning a prize. So yeah, so I entered, and yeah, so that kind of takes me to the reason I'm here. So I was fortunate, and I'm still hugely grateful to have won the prize that you guys offered at the 2019 Glass Biennale. And yeah, so it's been quite um, a change for someone like me to now be kind of thrust into the world of contemporary glass. You know, I've undertaken quite a few things since I won the prize. Um, yeah, I began teaching now. I found that there was quite a desire, particularly amongst the American fused glass community, to actually understand the techniques I use. So I've been fortunate enough to travel to America. Unfortunately, last year was meant to be a really big year for me traveling. I was meant to be in America, Canada, Australia, um, all around the world teaching this technique. And unfortunately, that all got curtailed. So the little video that I was going to show you guys was kind of me making something to give back to the community for all the disappointments that they'd felt for the fact that they couldn't attend the classes that they booked and were looking forward to attending and learning the technique that I have. So I put together a very simple kind of video of me producing a geometric bowl for them. And, you know, it wasn't an entirely altruistic action on my part, because I've had this. I wanted to get my, you know, bullseye glass. I predominantly work in bullseye glass. That's the fusing glass I use, and my kind of devious plan with this tutorial was to kind of get it in front of the eyes of the people at Bullseye Glass. You know, I've wanted to teach with them since I began teaching. You know, it's you know, being kind of accepted by your peers and the people who manufacture the glass that you work with is more important to me than making money and such like. So so producing that video was, you know, to get an audience for any further videos I was going to potentially sell to them, but also to get the people at Bullseye Glass noticing my teaching. And the video just went crazy. I think everybody in the whole community was making this bowl at the same time, and I was just swamped with messages. Within like a week, it had over 10,000 views, and every glass forum I was visiting, there were versions of this bowl that I'd made this video for. But so I decided to take the tutorial down because I just couldn't cope with the constant messages I was getting regarding this tutorial. And as I took it down, the same day I took it down, I was fortunate to have an email from Bullseye Glass inviting me to remake the video and actually launch it with them through their new online teaching program that they just were introducing. So the kind of devious plan I had with it sort of worked. So that's the kind of thing that I'm concentrating on right now, is remaking that video. But basically the video shows you how I put together the work that I put together. So it was a much more simplified, watered down version of the work that I had in the Biennale. So I'll try and find my um, little slideshow that I put together. And you'll have to bear with me because I'm not particularly great with this stuff. Um, so I'm trying to find. Yeah. Yeah, I'm really sorry. I kind of had this all planned beforehand, and now I can't find it. Um, I hope you're not seeing anything yet, are you? Um, right. I think we're all, I think I'm almost there. Um, just everything is right. Can everyone see that now?
Yes.
Ah, good, good. Right. So yes. So that was this is the work that I make these days, and this was my piece that was in the Biennale, next to the fabulous work of Heike Bracklow. It was, you know, a huge honor to have my piece next to hers at the Biennale. So yeah, as I say, it was a big surprise to actually get in with my work. And winning a prize was even more spectacular. So this is a piece I put in there, which was titled "Medicine for Garmonbozia." Quite a complicated title that reflected something that I was heavily into at the time, basically regarding Twin Peaks and such other stuff. I won't explain to you now. If you want, if you're interested, you can ask me at the end. So yeah, that was a dinner. So and there we all are. Fantastic evening that I'm still hugely grateful, and one of my kind of primo memories of that's still in my still kind of going strong in my life. You know, I've never really quite experienced anything quite like that before. So yeah, so that's the piece. So this is the work that I kind of produce. So it's very much, if we'd watched the video, we would have seen that all the work that I produce is kind of like marquetry. So if you imagine how marquetry, wooden marquetry is put together, so everything begins with I put together sheets of striped glass, and they're put together in a very particular way. And then that sheet of glass, when of 1 millimeter rods, is then fired into the kiln, comes out, and I then deconstruct that sheet of glass down from a sheet of just pure stripe into individual kind of sections that are cut either at 45 degrees. Some are strips, some are small triangles, some are cut along in the direction of the stripes, and then it's all kind of arranged together. So I have some shots of the production of these pieces that will be coming up. So I've just got a few here just to sort of show you how things end up. So they're quite complicated pieces that rely on quite a lot of precision cutting and arranging of the glass and quite a lot of time. So that's a general selection of my larger scale, more complicated work. So if I'm zooming too fast, you say I'm just trying to get to. So here we go. So this is basically how the work is put together. So I always kind of draw maps. So there's a lot of geometry involved, but the basic kind of map I arrange my pieces on is so it's just basic eightfold symmetry. So I have like 8 points I'm arranging the pieces of glass on. So as I say, prior to this, I would have put together many sheets of 1 millimeter rods of glass arranged onto a piece of 2 millimeter clear sheet glass. And then once that sheet is cooked in the kiln, I then break it down into these much smaller geometric elements. So I begin in the center with like 4 right-angled triangles. And then the next image shows that there's another set of 8 right-angled triangles arranged outside of that. And then I cut chevron strips, which are then arranged together. So 45-degree strips, when they're kind of pushed next to one another, create a chevron. So around those central right-angled triangles, you have there's like 16 strips of glass around that central core in the third image, and then it just keeps growing. So I don't have a particular kind of vision of the end result. I just allow the glass to kind of just choose its own kind of path in some ways. So I just build from the center and just let it just expand quite organically in some ways. So as you can see, it's quite there's quite a lot of pieces and elements that go into each one. So there, these are the 1 millimeter rods of glass that Bullseye kindly produce for me to use in the work. So there's a nice rainbow selection there. That's one of the sheets I put together. So each kind of area of the glass so the rods are laid out in a particular way for me to then deconstruct that into sections, and each section of that sheet serves a different purpose. It's quite a complicated thing to explain without actually having the things in front of me and being able to. I'm doing a lot of gesticulating right now and touching the screen, which obviously is not helping the description too much. But so these are the sort of chevron strips I kind of cut down and then joined together. So as I say, just kind of like marquetry. So I'm making sure that every strip is cut in a uniform thickness. Any discrepancy in the angles or the thicknesses as I'm building from the center and expanding outwards, any small discrepancies will become a much larger, bigger problem if I get it wrong towards the center. So accuracy is a primary concern for me. So there's various kind of tools I use to ensure that everything stays as accurate as it possibly can. So here's another kind of image of a piece in production. I think this may even be the piece that was in the Biennale. I don't often take shots of pieces in production because, you know, quite often when I'm making these things, when it's going well, the last thing you want to do is kind of interrupt your flow and take photographs. So generally, you know, when I'm having a good day, I'll start in the morning and I'll get to the end of the day and I'll have this pattern in front of me, and it's kind of like, you know, when you're driving sometimes and you reach your destination and you think, well, gosh, how did I cross that many roundabouts and how did I not crash? You know, because it becomes almost automatic for me. So yeah, but something of this scale, which is, if I remember rightly, this is the Biennale piece. It takes about 3 days to actually put the pattern together in its raw form. So as you can see it growing there. So that's the final piece. But now I've built this onto the piece of paper. So the worst part comes now, that I now have to take this whole thing apart, and every single piece, because at this stage it's all covered in like grease from my finger, oil from the cutter. Every single piece now has to be taken from that design and washed and scrubbed and dried and then reapplied to a piece of clear glass, which will be the top cap of all those individual pieces. So I'm kind of, I don't have to like flip it over. I just recreate that. Once I've washed every piece, I take all those pieces and then place them onto another piece of glass, which is then, it's all kind of glued in position, and then the whole thing is flipped over and cooked in the kiln. So all that hard work has to be kind of taken apart and rebuilt. So quite time-consuming work. So here's another project that I was working on. This, as you can see, this is some of the tools. You know, lots of compasses and set squares. And this piece was one I was working for Contemporary Glass Society exhibition that was meant to happen at the Biscuit Factory up in Newcastle sometime last year. Unfortunately, it got cancelled due to the pandemic. So I'd made 3 wall pieces for that show. This was one of them. So this is about 60 centimeters across. You know, there are limitations scale wise for an individual piece. Obviously, you could expand it to whatever size if you did like several kind of pieces and joined together. But there's a for one individual piece, there's quite a limit on the size because I have to flip these things over onto the kiln. If they become much bigger than 60 centimeters in width, then they become too heavy and too cumbersome for me to actually perform the function I need to. You know, there's various reasons why they can't be just built onto the kiln shelf, and it's all to do with like trapping um, the the material you apply to the kiln shelf in between each individual piece. So it's all about maintaining a good quality of finish on the piece. So that's a piece. Unfortunately, I don't have an image of it on my computer right now of it on its mount. So that's the piece just displayed on a white wall. We have custom mounts for that. And here's another piece that was put together for the Biscuit Factory exhibition. So this was all prior to the pandemic. So this all happened just after I won the prize and the prize dinner. So I was just getting work ready for this exhibition. Again, some individual chevron strips and some more construction images. Ooh, sorry, I lost one there. So yeah, so this is another large scale piece. This is one of my favorite ones. I love color, but I also love working without color. And so this is just grays and black. And because you're not working with color so much, you have to try a little harder when it comes to the tonal effects that you achieve within the glass. So this was another large piece, one of my favorites that I've ever made. As you can see, this is again over 3 or 4 days of building the pattern. So as you can see, what I mentioned earlier about there being a lot of influence from my days in stained glass, it's very much kind of put together in a similar way that you would put together a stained glass window. So there's a finished panel that now, it was meant to be for that exhibition. Fortunately, I did find a home for it when the exhibition was cancelled. Unfortunately, I have a really good following on Instagram, so I don't ever seem to have any problem finding any home for my work. So yeah, and there's a piece in my hands at the start of the pandemic with one of my wife's homemade face masks. So yeah, so the pandemic hit, things changed slightly. All the exhibitions I was supposed to be attending that I'd been making work for all got cancelled. So I cleaned my oven, and yeah, my oven hadn't been cleaned for 8 years. So as you can see, this was quite early days. I think when it came to the pandemic, I sort of peaked a bit early. I cleaned my oven, I got massively into baking, and then I just had a big kind of slump. So yeah, as I say, I got into baking all kinds of things that I'd never really baked before. My first ever pie. um, but yeah, as this was happening, I was interviewed for Glass Art magazine. I did I'm not a great kind of tech person. I don't really understand Zoom that much, as you maybe witnessed earlier on. I don't spend a huge amount of time on the computer. I prefer I'm a more analog kind of guy rather than digital. I like records and books rather than iPads and such like. Um, so yeah, I had my proper sort of first Zoom meeting with the lady from Glass Art magazine who did an interview with me, and fortunately, I made it as the cover star. So this was around about it's about July last year. So yeah, it was a really nice article that she put together, a sort of 4-page spread. Oops, sorry. So yeah, that was a great little thing. And then at the same time, I was still working on some larger scale work, kind of preparing for exhibitions. I didn't foresee the pandemic being a long term kind of thing. So, I was still planning on work for exhibitions, and I had this piece, which there's a supplier of fused glass in this country called Warm Glass, based down near Bristol, who I buy, excuse me, who I buy a lot of my fused glass supplies from, and they have a competition every year called the Warm Glass Prize. And I've entered it every year. It's just about supporting a local, a British business, and there's people all around the world enter. And that was my piece that I entered last year. I was fortunate to be one of their highly commended um, artists that year. I didn't win, but being highly commended is still an achievement that I was quite proud of. So I was also quite proud of that particular piece. Sometimes when you put work together, the end result kind of exceeds your expectations. Sorry, my slideshow seems to be there. It is. So yeah, sometimes the arrangement of colors and the design work better than others, and this particular one just seemed to work really well. So I was quite proud of that piece. This was another piece I put together for potential exhibitions. My first time actually trying this particular shape within my work. I often don't put a lot of form into my work because I spend so long working on the actual pattern and keeping the pattern as crisp as possible. To then actually deform that design, I always find quite difficult and quite a wrench on my soul. So it took a lot to kind of do this to this particular panel, but the end result I think worked pretty well. So it's something I'm going to explore further. This is quite a large piece, the biggest sort of handkerchief shaped vase I've ever produced, and the shape of my work lent itself really well to this particular design because it did fall in a nice kind of geometric, if slightly undulating form. So it did have kind of 4 points and four little kind of cups on the side. So it did still satisfy my desire for symmetry. So as the pandemic went on, I realized that things were going to have to change because there were no exhibitions coming up, and this being the sole source of my income. If I don't make money every month, my bills don't pay. I don't unfortunately have anyone who can sort of back me up. If I don't sell my work, then things come to a halt. So I came up with this idea of doing a limited run of work that I was going to call my COVID balls. So slightly smaller versions of my bigger scale work that I decided that for the duration of the pandemic, I was going to sell at a slightly lower rate than I normally did. So because there were no gallery fees involved, I mainly did this through my Instagram account. And I just sort of said to people, look, it's going to be a limited run for the duration of the pandemic, that each one of them is going to be numbered. So it would be CVD 1 to CVD 19. So COVID 1 to COVID 19. And then once I got to 19, I was going to stop. But I had so much interest that I now, this morning, I pulled CVD 61 out of the kiln, and I still have a waiting list on my Instagram of over, I think at the last count it was 78 people who are waiting for these balls. So I think I'll be continuing to make these well past the end of the pandemic, which is a good thing because it means I have a steady kind of income stream with these. I can make about 3 or 4 of these pieces in a week, and every one of them pretty much as soon as they're finished, finds a home. So these are the pieces I've been making for the duration of the pandemic. So I'll whiz through these. As I say, I'm up to, in fact, I think it was piece 64 to 67 went in the kiln this afternoon. They'll be finished early next week. So yeah, it's going to hit well over 100. And I collaborate. My dad's a bit of a wood butcher in his, he's retired now and he does a bit of wood turning. So my dad turns these little mahogany bases that the bowls sit on. So it just lifts them up off the table and just kind of sits them a little higher and more proud. So they become more of an object than just a bowl sat on a table. So they have their own pedestal. So it's something me and my dad kind of work together on. Here's another one of these in production. So yeah, so I with this, because they're not a bespoke commission, I just make them in the colors I want to make. So I can vary, I can try out color schemes, which if they're successful, I kind of take a note of and keep for future use. And basically people on the list get the choice of 3, and I just keep moving down my list until all 3 of the bowls I produced that week have gone. So people can pass on the list if they're not quite into that selection. They can wait until the following week for another selection, but generally everyone, as I offer them up, go, and they pretty much all end up across the pond in America. So one of the things that I'm really fortunate. I have quite a big following in the US glass fusing community. That's consequently where most of my work goes. So these are far from, these are obviously without access to professional photographers as well through the pandemic. I've had to kind of adjust my workshop to actually find some clean space to take photographs myself. So these are just photographs just taken on my telephone. And this was the tutorial I was talking about early on, the video tutorial that I now have to remake for Bullseye. This was the basic geometric bowl I was explaining how to put together in that tutorial. This was just something when I taught my other class where I was teaching my more complicated work. This was something that I would just sort of tag on the end for the people who were really fast and finished their projects before everyone else. And it would be just something on the last day just to show people, you can put this together really quickly with your leftover scraps. And but yeah, this has been taken up really enthusiastically by the glass fusing community because it is quite a simple thing to put together, but quite effective. This is me just taking it to the next level. And there's a few examples of ones that I was putting together just to show people how it works. Back to the COVID bowls, and we're almost kind of up to date. I think this one is CVD 59. So yeah, so I kind of work with a mixture of opalescent and transparent glasses. This one was mainly transparent rainbow colors mixed with some opalescent black. Occasionally, I like to get away from the symmetry, and it's just good to free up from time to time, even though this still is quite a lot of work to put something like this together. This is using up some of my scrap elements, but just not relying and using the kind of symmetrical kind of map that I lay down, so I can just be a bit more freeform. So that ended up as a vase. This is a work in progress that I've still got in my workshop. So I'm gonna be producing a lid for this. So this is going to be my first lidded vessel, and I'm going to again collaborate with my dad, who's going to turn an elongated ebony pedestal that's going to sit on top of. And then the lid that I'm going to make for the top of it will also have an ebony finial on the top. So when the whole thing's together, it will be like quite a large. So it'd be probably about, imagine about 16 inches tall, and have the form of a goblet. So that's something I'm working on. There's another piece I'm working on, which is a more kind of abstract wall panel. That's still yet to be finished. So that's kind of how it is at this stage. So there's a few pieces in process in my workshop. Here's just a couple of other pieces that are in process this week. These are the ones that went in the kiln today. And I just chucked that in the end. So yeah, this was kind of something I put together as again an aside from the work that I make. So you know, my degree is in sculpture, so this was a vanitas that I put together for an exhibition at Chester Cathedral. So it's still using glass and using some of the same skills that I use in glass. So it's based on the whole bell, book, and candle ritual, and it's a very personal piece. You know, the poem that's written on the bell has a lot of resonance for me, and the candle, I don't know if I have a close-up of it or not. The candle has all these pinned butterflies on. And the butterflies, each one of them is punched out of my last ever packet of cigarettes. You know, I gave up smoking just as I made this piece. And at the same time as I was giving up smoking, I was kicking a lot of other negative aspects of my life out of the way, including the Christmas markets and such like. So this was a piece I put together for there. You know, that again, I collaborated with my dad. My dad turned the handle of the bell, which I don't know if you can quite see it, but it's actually the profile of a screaming face. So that there was a lot of kind of personal sort of symbolism built into this particular piece. So yeah, that was in Chester Cathedral. And I think that, there we go, that's my mantra. You know, I've always, you know, I treat kind of my production of glass like, you know, it's a job for me, in some ways. And so I work every day like a job, but you know, I'm in my workshop for 9 o'clock, and generally I'm there till 5:30 every day, even if I'm uninspired, which, you know, happens quite regularly. But I just feel, you know, if you continue working through your periods of lack of inspiration, you can overcome that. And you know, the work that I produce anyway is it's a therapy for me as well. You know, the process is a kind of therapeutic tool for me. You know, I need to be centered. You know, I have quite a chaotic mind, and I suffer a lot from anxiety and such like. And making the work I do allows me to sort of just control those things. So it's my release as well as my work and my and it's kind of everything for me, really. So if I couldn't do this, I don't know really what I would do. So working hard at it to make it work is of paramount importance. So yes, that's me, and that's where I am kind of now. So there we go. So we're back to the start. So yeah, have I gone over time, Paul?
No, you're absolutely perfect. What an inspiration.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
certainly is.
Absolutely amazing. Fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you
Well
so
done.
much.
Yes.
Totally
Very, very interesting.
and a lovely story too.
Mm.
Yeah, it's an honest story. You know, I don't really come from an art background as such. You know, as I say, my mum has got into pottery in the sort of later part of her life. And you know, in some ways, we know we've both kind of gone off on our creative paths together. You know, I decided to go to art school. For, I don't know, it was just something that suddenly happened. And I'd always been good at drawing, but I never thought I would build a career, um, which I'm hugely grateful to say that I have. I managed. I'm not a rich man, but I'm rich in many other ways. But yeah, I survive on my art, and I have done now for 25 years. So,
You,
yeah,
you really have, you almost have a mantra similar to mine, which is that I've always wanted, my definition of retirement is to have a hobby and get paid for it. I maintain that I retired about 40 years ago because I just love what I do.
yeah,
And yes, it indeed involves an element of discipline,
yeah,
and you do have good days and bad days. But if you're honest to it, you can thoroughly enjoy doing it, and hopefully people will appreciate the efforts that you put in.
yeah, yeah.
What sort of price, may I ask, it's probably a bit benign, but what sort of price are your COVID bowls?
My COVID bowls are only £250.
Oh, a mere snip.
They are.
And
Yeah, yeah.
they're flying out the window like flying saucers.
Well, it's not
Well,
surprising.
I'm really, really fortunate. I had a bit of a break on Instagram. Because of the nature of my work, because it is this kind of mandala type affair, I appeal to a growing community of glass collectors in America who come at art from a different angle. That I'm hesitating to say what angle they come at it from, but last year the Corning New Glass Review had its first borosilicate cannabis pipe included in its esteemed edition, and there's a big community in America, which I never knew anything about this until quite recently myself, and there's a big community of people in America who make high-end pipes and bongs out of borosilicate glass. So it's kind of like a lamp working technique. But some of these pipes sell for upward. Well, the most expensive one in the market currently is $250,000, and they regularly sell for tens of thousands of dollars. And the story goes that this whole industry kind of grew up because people involved in the cannabis industry who can't bank their money in the conventional, because it's federally illegal, they can't bank their proceeds from the industry into their bank accounts, so they launder their money through high-end glassware, which is what so this industry is born, and it's a massive thing. There's online videos all about this, and some of these guys are incredible artists. The work they're making is like nothing you've ever seen in glass. So yeah, maybe someone should do a presentation on this scene.
Catherine wants to make a
Catherine.
contribution.
I would just vouch for that because occasionally I teach engraving at Corning,
All right.
at the museum there,
Yeah.
and most of the courses are either very earnest people blowing glass and stretching their muscles, or they're not little old ladies doing engraving with me. No, they're mostly young people. But there's sort of heavy metal music throbbing out of the lamp working department,
Yeah.
which nearly died until the great bong market and rave hit lamp working. And it's all these guys with their caps the wrong way on and their muscles heaving, blowing these extravagant bongs. And
Yeah.
it just, they're the lunatic fringe of every Corning meeting.
Yeah. I think it's a guy called David Colton who made it into the New Glass Now exhibition that I think's just finished at Corning, that I was lucky to be in America and go and visit. He's got a piece, and it's just, you know,
They're incredible pieces.
yeah, you wouldn't imagine that they would have a function. So
But they are full working
yes,
bonds.
yeah, yeah, yeah. If you
Can't
clearly
vouch
think-
for that, of course. No,
no, I would know
no,
nothing
no.
about such subjects personally. Maybe in my past, but certainly not now. But so yeah, so I'm fortunate that not only does my work appeal to the fusing community, the conventional fusing community, it also appeals to this borosilicate scene that's really massive in America. And some of these guys, you know, they buy houses, they buy very nice houses in California based on the revenue they make from making these glass pipes. And they all now have glass collections, and there's a lot of kind of one-upmanship. And because certain people in the community found my work and bought pieces of my work, then everyone else in the community now
Has to have it. Yeah.
has to have a piece of my work.
Well,
So,
I can see the colours and the fantastic precision and design of your work really appealing there. And it's so different from the rather serious arty work that happens in European glass.
yeah, but that kind of preclude me from things over here.
No, I wouldn't take that attitude.
Yeah.
And your
No,
skills,
I
your
wouldn't.
glass cutting skills are just impressive. Because presumably you're just cutting them and you're not even having to finish them before you...
I do undertake a little bit of grinding on them, but it's minimal.
I'm sure, because otherwise you couldn't afford to do it so quickly.
No. So as I say, the bowls I'm producing right now, if I really knuckle down, I can produce sort of 4 in a week, and that's including kind of firing times as well. So I generally can produce one of those
Massively
patterns.
impressive. Yeah.
Incredible.
Yeah. It's hard work, but it's
I was
work.
looking at your off-cut ones, and
Oh,
your
yeah.
off-cut ones are actually beautiful in my
Yes.
view as well.
They're all beautiful.
They would take you far less time to make, and you could knock about 20 off of those, or 30 maybe a week, and that would be a really good selling point because people could buy sets of them.
They don't actually take that much less time to make.
Oh, sorry.
You've still
No,
got to make them
yeah,
into the form.
They're
In
just as
fact,
good.
Thank you. But the angles and the kind of joining them together still is a complicated affair. So that they take, because I'm more used to the symmetrical pieces, I can rattle through them quite quickly. But the more random pieces require a lot more complicated angles. So in some ways they take a little longer. But they're using byproduct glass, so they so they don't have to...
Ian, presumably the angles for the bowls have to be slightly different, do they?
And in what respect, sorry?
Well, if you're doing them flat,
Yeah.
then that's one thing. But if it's a curved shape...
Oh, no. See, the way that glass fusing works, everything is produced initially as a flat form. So all the bowls begin as a circular flat disc. The final stage in glass in the technique that I use is to actually put the shape into the piece. So I go through like 4 stages before I actually put the bowl shape into that flat disc. So generally it involves using it's using gravity and ceramic formers to drop the glass into or drop the glass over to create the forms. So that's always the last stage. So you always have to make sure that the square piece or the round piece that you're making, or your kind of lovely finishing on the edge, is all done before you do that final. And it's a much lower temperature. You're just taking the glass to the temperature where it just becomes flexible. So you're not actually kind of changing any surface structure. You're not kind of, if you had a scratch on that disc before you then put the shape into it, that scratch wouldn't disappear when you when you heat it to actually make it form that shape. So it has to be a pristine flat piece or it's shaped.
You'll have to look forward to next year when we've got Ian doing some work in collaboration with a whole group of other artists.
Hello, Vanessa.
Hiya.
Here.
I'm somewhat reminded, Ian, that you were talking about being traditional in terms of the things that you like. And I was just thinking of if you ever got inspiration from using vinyl records, and there was an art form I think in the 70s, I think it was, where people were making shapes and bowls out of vinyl records.
Sacrilege.
Yes.
Well, it's what people did.
You never do that to a piece of vinyl.
Well, it depends. I mean, I've got a whole collection of vinyl blanks because of working with the music industry for a little while, and I use them as canapé trays
Okay.
to serve canopies off of.
Right.
It was a quirk that we did, and we actually used CDs as well as Christmas decorations. The blanks, we put them back to back with the silver. So, I mean, there are things that can be done with recycling stuff and using it up.
Yeah. I don't think I'll be doing that with any of my records.
No. Well, I've still got my vinyl collection, so as well as the tape collection.
I just haven't taken to the whole digital age in the way that I probably should. I'm not really that old. I'm old enough, but so I kind of missed it at school. But I just haven't. It just doesn't sit comfortably with me. I don't like. I like to own things. I like to own my records. I like to take my records out of a sleeve and put them on the record player. I don't like just kind of plugging something in and it just just coming out of the speakers and just being intangible. So yeah,
I think I think there's still a lot of people like that.
Yeah, I think that there definitely are. I know I'm not the only one.
And I think probably during this COVID period, people have revisited a lot of things that they had in their fast working lives have actually abandoned.
Yeah.
Well, we're running a little over time. I think we'll hand over to Master to call it a night, I think.
Well, thank you ever so much, everyone, for tuning in.
Ian, let me say thank you. Goodness me, we should be thanking you. That was an absolutely magical mystery tour. I loved your sort of frank, honest, and almost self-effacing description of your career, how you developed from your earlier days and moved around the country and so forth. Absolutely fascinating. And I still can't make the leap in my mind between a forklift truck driver and the designer and producer of those magical, intricate pieces of glass that you produce.
Thank you.
It's just absolutely astonishing. And may I ask you a quick question? How do the colours, when you heat the things, that you make your lovely designs and put them all together on a sheet of glass and put it in a kiln and it all bonds together?
Yes.
How do you stop the colours sort of changing under heat?
Well, most of the colors I'm using have already been tested. So generally, most of them stay the color that, you can push the temperature. The more times you heat glass, you can change the color of it. And generally, that's not something you should be doing. The glass that I'm using has been tested to make sure that it is fairly durable at the temperatures I'm using. There are a few of the colors that I use which are called strikers, which, when I see them in there before I fire them, that they don't look anything like the color that they come out in. Particularly deep red is one, and it's a very transparent sort of pale yellow color, but when it's fired it comes out a very, very deep red. So sometimes when they kind of get mixed in, they can cause a little bit of a surprise, but so if as long as your workshop's fairly well organized, those surprises happen less and less.
Well, yours clearly is, and the intricacy of it all is quite amazing. We're really grateful to you for spending your time telling us about your career and your fantastic work.
That's the least I can do.
Thank you so much, and we will keep in touch.
No, thank you for the honor, and thank you again for everything that you've helped along the years since the prize. So You know, so I owe you guys a lot.
We're delighted to be connected to such a brilliant glass artist. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Fantastic, thank you.
Thank you.
And on that, ladies and gentlemen, I will say good night. Next week, you've got culinary adventures with the clock again.
Yeah, thank you
Good
again.
night. God bless. Take care.